can Americans dream of electronic eudaimonia? Why would they want to? So we're going to look at Zhang and a sort of realistic, as it were, or quasi-mythological view of the Chinese attitude towards the Americans, and at Kristen Stewart and at Dukin. Kristen Stewart viewed as under the question, is she under the eye of theory or speculation of Giovanni Gentili, the unalloyed type of the fascist, or fascist at its purest, according to something like Isaiah Berlin, something in the direction of Isaiah Berlin's liberal authoritarianism. So the first thing let's look at this first notion of sort of situate ourselves within this Nietzschean frame that we've been sort of going more towards. So we mentioned this in the last couple of videos. We're talking about the I think it's like the word that's translated as infinite is something like unendliches or something. Unendliches nichts. So the god of the German word nichts sounds very much like nox in the Latin word, and the word Aristotle uses is nix, transliterated with a y, n-y-x. It could be as well n-i-x. And Aristotle situates the center, as it were, the place where he's going to place noesis according to noesis, as it were, the thinking according to thinking, Boulēsis, or this sort of right willing, where we could make a comparison between, there's somewhere in a passage, it's not that's like we're making a really strong case or something, but there's somewhere in a passage where this word Aristotle's using in order to contrast Thumos and Epithumos, or the various ways of making irrational or not agathos, not good decisions, is this contrast between the Boulēsis, which is the right way to act, and the ways to act that are just drawn on by some fancy, or by especially just by the thought of just like that would be pleasurable to do it this way, and then Aristotle just saying it's simply an improvement to go from that to then. It could be on matters of health, right? It could be on matters of health. You think you're doing something that's right, and then you make an improvement, or you're just like going on pleasure, but then you realize there's some bad health effect, and you make some change. It's more towards Boulēsis then. But this word is used, as I was trying to get to, in some ancient literature in this situation. I mean, it's close to the concept of will. There's a bunch of different, there's like 2 or 3 different ways we could try to construct Aristotle's notion of will, but they all overlap and they're not contradictory. This Boulēsis is given sometimes as in the context where somebody's just ready to bolt, sort of like there's a soldier in war or something, he's about to make a bolt, but there's sort of a, maybe possibly time of opportunity issue is there also at the same time, so that the will involves this sort of there's this impulse charged up, and then you're just waiting for this so-called not chronic time, but the I always forget what the time of opportunity is. I guess it's chironic. I think it's called chironic. Kairos time. um, which is especially associated with the timing of somebody delivering a speech to an audience, with the Athenians anyway. But yeah, this space of Boulēsis is sort of what we're aiming at, like this zone of impulse towards doing stuff. That's what Aristotle's aiming at. And then we have, my version is like Jang, if we understand Jang as like almost Chinese AI equipment. Because what it seems like is there's like a vast number of people coming together and saying, this is what you should be saying. That's how it feels. That's how it seems like that I am Legion thing. Who is Satan? It's like the whole Roman legion. It seems like there's a lot of people behind Jang, sort of saying this is the absolute strongest statements you can make on this political situation. It's sort of hypnotic the way he talks, like with this sort of constant sort of like straightforward, like worked out arguments and very sort of strong, seemingly straightforward sense comments. And then there's a situation where with the Dugan interview, he was saying, yeah, but we would prefer, Chinese kind of prefer to improve our standard of living and things like that, the material improvements. And then Dugan saying, but this is part of what the katakon comes in, because every society has to make a decision whether they're going to slip into something like the kingdom of Epstein, or whether they're going to put a halt to the madness. Weinstein, I think the jury broke and wouldn't convict him. He had been using, this is a guy that's been hiring the Mossad to torture and attack his victims in order to shut them up and things like that. And they don't convict him. I think if it was me, I think there should be a star chamber. And it's like, even if it's true, and of course it will be true, that there'll be people who will falsely charge him because they're just taking advantage of the situation, opportunists. It doesn't matter, because we know that he's committed we know this is the guy that's like a total criminal. It doesn't matter. There's a certain moment when it's clear that something is the case, and then all the tests that you would usually do, all the safeguards, all the things that would go around with this ratio of how many people we want to put into how many guilty men to how many innocent men we want in prison, which I guess in the extreme form, then you go back to the world of the 19th century in the non-English speaking countries, or in the non-European countries. You got somebody like Abdul Rahman Khan in Afghanistan, who he boasts he boasts there's no crime here. It's like, how much crime do you have in a big English city? It's more than I have in the whole country of Afghanistan. And it may not be, and it was probably actually true, but the reason was because they just killed a lot of people outright who were probably innocent, just because it scares people to death. His atmosphere of arbitrary authority. But I think there's a third option, which is the star chamber. The star chamber is when sensible people look, and then you're like, everybody knows O.J. Simpson was guilty of murder. It's like, we weren't there, we didn't witness it, but we know that he stabbed those two people. There's some things where that's not really the full. I think it's a better case with the Weinstein. We have so much evidence or so many witnesses. Just look at him, look at the sociopath and so on, and you could see it. It's obvious once it's out in the open. I think in those type of conditions, there should be just suspend and drop all the legal shenanigans, because you don't need it anymore. Suspend and drop process. There's no more due process at the once you know the person is guilty. It's better to wade into that tyranny than it is. I mean, that this potential for tyranny on the notion that absolute power, tends to corrupt. Maybe, but maybe there's some people that are actually aren't total dirtbags or whatever, rat bags, whatever the British are called, Trump. So, I mean, just think of I give a trivial example, but if you just think about the movie Something About Mary, where the Matt Dillon character plays the sleazy character, and then Ben Stiller plays, of course, the nice Jewish guy, and then you see there's, but the whole point of it is that it's not just the character they're playing. It's if you reversed it, it wouldn't have the same effect. I mean, if you made Ben Stiller play the sleazy character, it would have a different effect. It's because some people are more, like Trump, are more like that by their very nature. Or some people like Vance are the more just by their very nature. They might not be more exciting in some sense, because like one can get sort of in the Thumos of it. One could get drawn into that kind of thing. But then, so what I wanted to say is about Zhang is it's as though the Chinese, and you kind of see it in Xi. In a way, this is just a realistic picture. It's not necessarily the truth. Xi sort of just has total contempt for the Westerners, because it's basically like, you guys don't respect the thinking part of your community. You don't even think that you don't think study is particularly important. I heard I heard years ago, like some students walking around, and they said American students, and they made some comment about they were just being giddy or whatever. They made some comment about the moon landing was fake, and they were just kind of giggling and blah blah blah. But they didn't really. But the point was, they totally didn't believe it. They just thought it was out. We're pretending to be people that think the moon landing is fake, or fools, or sort of like insane people. But then I heard a comment from two Chinese students, and one of them, she says, study is not necessary. And then there's this like mad, giddy laughter between the two of them. And then they had been saying something before this, and they continued to make more remarks afterwards. But then he said, study is overrated. And then he actually let out like a howl, like it was a real howler, right? Because of course they think only imbeciles would sort of have that attitude, right? So in a certain way, I'm thinking like Xi looks at the West as subhumans, right? Because in this Aristotelian sense of our Boulēsis, the way we set, the way we make our move, our decisions, it's sunk into this mass force of stupidity, right? So then I think this is why I think it's a little bit, there's a question of a negotiation with the technological essence. So certainly China's doing it, is you could use technology to try to give the thinking part of the community. So for instance, what I mean, like people should have the pride not to say things like, I mean, anyone presenting themselves as saying something publicly intellectually, not to continuously repeat things like that Marx was against private property. Marx was against private property. It's true, Marx was against private property, but he was for personal property. Okay, think how much follows from that. There's a lot of people that don't know what a technical term is, or that they want to make distinctions, and they're not familiar with that, and then it's difficult to communicate things. But if you're talking to the public, and I just saw there's just a guy on Piers Morgan with Zizek that again repeated this. Is so galling. As you've been hearing, how can people have so little intellectual self-respect as to continue to do this kind of thing? I mean, it either means the guy he was a young guy, he probably didn't even look it up. He heard Jordan Peterson say it or something. And there's a lot of like power to the pseudos, because it's people repeated, it's charged, they get people like to hear it. Couldn't we isn't there an ameliorationist path, right? Because even there, through technocracy, there could be, actually push towards something that's legitimately more like Prussia, legitimately good, like that there's actual respect for the thinking part of the community, and such that everyone can in a way understand that thinking is going on there, and regard it as something of maximum value, because it's telling us about the difference between these limited courses in nature, which are, this question, by the way, is supposed to be settled by the market fundamentalism. But what's happened actually is that we've gone into this thing called the golden straitjacket, right? The golden straitjacket is sort of Ursula von der Leyen, and the idea is you gain in through the efficiency of the overall world system, which means, of course, which means like something like you have in the Strait of Hormuz, there's a commercial vessel gets in trouble, and then then there's some factory outside Brussels won't get their equipment, and then this is the overall something you don't want if you're for this golden straitjacket of participating in the world system, in this great in the sort of faucets and gauges and tanks and piping of the world system, understood as the system of flows of liquidity and so on. This Keynesian notion of this, here's the world system, and we have to, link more, open more markets, put more Lego blocks into it, and it becomes greater and greater, and then you give up you give up your sovereignty in sort of de facto in order to be part of the club, part of the NATO group or the Western Alliance. But you gain in improvements in your material circumstances. So it's like, I mean, for sure, like a lot of Europeans live quite a bit better than a lot of Americans, I would say, but also than quite a bit of the so-called shithole countries, as Trump puts it, which I take to mean primarily just poor countries. So that's a very powerful sort of Thumos or appetitive, or I guess, or orexis in a larger sense, appetitive issue. And then this question is, what's the alternative to breaking from the so-called golden straitjacket? Well, one, this is ameliorationist path of just sort of incrementally trying to improve the population's regard for reason. As you know, a peasant woman would have had a high regard for Immanuel Kant in sometime around 1850 or whatever, in the core of the Prussian thing. Um, because there was a general regard for um, public office as something sort of with some beliefs. There was a belief that the Aristotelian power was active there. But so, okay, that's why this drama is sort of comes down to us in a peculiar way, is that Hegel split off in a few different directions, right? So basically, let's make the juxtaposition Aristotle-Hegel. That's the real juxtaposition, in politically speaking. So you get Trendelenburg writes his how is it, the logistic Untersuchungen, Logistica Untersuchungen, his logical investigation. Husserl wrote a book with the same title, I think it's exactly the same title pretty much. But this is Trendelenburg in like 1840, so it's Hegel only been dead like 9 years. And it totally denounces Hegel from an Aristotelian point of view and says, yeah, Hegel, far from like Aristotle being between the night on the one side, the mythological view, and the physics, the physicists say, when the world doesn't exist, there's a plenum, there's a material plenum, so that like everything's in a high mass state before the 14 billion year old heat event called the Big Bang. This was everything's compacted into one tiny little spot of ultra mass or whatever, hypermass, as against the night, the full set. So there's this kind of a like proto-Kantian thought in Aristotle, like this juxtaposition of these two extremes, and then sort of and then his solution is to lay them over each other. So the same way as Kant does with the real and the noumenal, or the phenomenal and the noumenal in his system, which is actually not idealistic. It's realist, idealistic. It's both. As Aristotle is as this material plenum of the atomist, Nix, or the night out of which everything steps. I mean, one could interpret that as follows. The night out of which everything steps is the same as what sight sees, whereas what sight sees is the inertia or the actuality for Aristotle, whereas what the physicists speak of is the eye, the physical eye, as the thing that has for its essence sight. So at the beginning of Aristotle, there's this orientation of the Boulēsis, if you like. There's this orientation of the rational, the rational way of guiding ourselves, as against the some sort of apparent way of guiding ourselves, some sort of doxa or something. Although I think, yeah, that's always, I mean, I guess I think the doxa means that it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to be in a discussion like in the Politeia between Glaucon and Socrates, where you're positively stating what your view on the matter, some matter is, but it's rather, the doxa includes also what you do, even what your view is, even if you're not really thinking about it somehow. So that then some people could say, oh yeah, well, he was just absorbed into spirit of his time or whatever. He didn't even make clear to himself in this liberal classical way that this distancing between him. He'd never reached the theoretical position. He was always in the natural position, but natural position for a Prussian of a certain age, natural position for an Englishman of a certain age. That's his sort of Hegelian way of making these time distinctions. So yeah, through Trendelberg, there's a revolt, Aristotelian revolt against Hegel, already starting in 1840, and then out of Trendelenburg you get Brentano, and then Brentano, Strauss describes as sort of having the strange, what did he describe? Strange, I want to say strange medieval features or something, but yeah, somehow that is, I forget his actual phrase, unfortunately, but somehow that he's a creature of the schoolmen or the Middle Ages in a weird way. And then, but of course that's because Trendelenburg had reinitiated this Aristotelian notion against, and again, because it's like Hegel, as in his absolute, has denied this Aristotelian position between the material plenum and the sort of the darkness without sight. It's like, which also brings us into this phase of a dream, right? Because when we're sleeping, there's a fire is kindled also, in a way. A certain light is shined that we call dreaming. And this seems to happen in a way in the same place, as it were, topos. Let's speak of the atopos. Sometimes Socrates drives these people into the atopos. They don't know where they are anymore. I think this is the same. This is also the same space. Socrates is more interested in this space, where you can close your eyes and have nothing, or sense deprivation can happen, or the dream could happen, lucid dreaming could happen, and the ordinary day happens. Socrates is more interested in this atopos, I think, than he is in the issue of this material plenum of the physicists, and giving an account from that point of view. But nonetheless, he says in the discussion with Zeno and Parmenides that he's not sure that he wants to say that stones, hair, and mud, I think, that's that's translated that way, have ideas in the way the good and the true and the beautiful have ideas, or even in the way a fisherman has, an angler has an idea. That there's something that makes it actual, and in a way corresponding to this permanent intellect. Yeah. So there's always, if you say there's always some material plenum, but then so what? It's just a potential to become stuff. And then like one stuff that it could become is a human being under certain conditions, right? But then there's the question where they're always sort of waiting these particular avenues. It's just in that way. It could be viewed in this way. This is just a simple kind of form function. Look at it. It's like there's, except that it wants to say the form, sort of what title we're calling things. Like Kurt Cobain said, the media had to call us something, so they called us grunge. And it's sort of like there's a title. That's, in this sense, it's sort of like it's just random. There's just like and then there's the ideal type of the grunge person is maybe Kurt Cobain himself. That's sort of a Max Weberian type of way. But then if you think, yeah, there was always meant to be this form, this grunge, or how does they call it? It somehow he described it in a way that makes it sort of like you could say it's a golden straitjacket music, in the sense that it appeals to the middle classes. And then it's like, yeah, maybe Hegel has already thought of this, because there's a certain type of aesthetic, so his notion is like there were people that were almost revolutionaries, and they were maybe closer to like being in the some kind of political violent actions, who were doing music. And there was punk rock and stuff, in the early punk rock, and then there was like the new wave, and the new wave softened everything and made it more commercial and made it hip to be square, and etc. And then he's saying that's basically what they're calling grunge is basically the same thing. It's something the media enjoys because it's kind of soft. And it's not, the people were really there to make money. They weren't like, all the musicians involved, as much as they talk about Rage Against the Machine or whatever, as much as they talk about political issues, their primary reason for being there is to become rock stars and make money and so on. Yeah, in a way that could be understood as aesthetic that goes along with this certain position in the rung of things. But okay, so what's the opposite of all this that we've been describing as the sort of liberal situation? Let's look at it as a form of is Kristen Stewart a fascist? So let's look. So first of all, the fascist is somebody that has to. There's sort of Jewish. The German school of jurisprudence. These people like von Goethe have basically said the basic sense of fascism in a word. I think the basic sense is because the conditions of things are constantly changing, therefore what can be regarded as just is also changing. So it's like if it becomes possible to have clean water or something, and then people are just deliberately not allowing clean water, that's unjust. But whereas if you're living, if the Gauls destroy the aqueducts or something, then what can you do? It's like, it depends on the conditions. You can't accuse the Romans of being unjust because the Gauls, you could make accusations, they should have posted guards around the aqueducts and prevented them from being smashed, and make sure that the water supply to Rome was ceaseless, and you could, make an argument. But basically, one can see there's certain conditions where you can't say the government is, or you can't say somebody else has been derelict of their of duty to the capital, to the cult of the capital. They've thrown in with us. They did their best. What can you say? So what's just has something to do with what's possible. That's obvious, right? But they just emphasize it in an extreme way. That's sort of what fascism is. And then they say we constantly have to be making this negotiation in our Boulēsis. We have to have a direct, and that's the idea of the Führer, of the guide. The Führer is translated leader, is El Duce, but it could also be better translated as guide, the guide of the people. So if you think of, so then you have Kristen Stewart, and she's making this movie, and then there are some people that aren't quite going along with the thing. Let me give this example that I've given before, but I like it quite a bit. In New York, between like 1930 and 1940, Strauss is at the New School, and the Church of the Christian Science reading room has a meeting, and then like 2 or 3 Jews showed up, and then they're like, "Oh, this is very interesting. Thank you for coming." And then like next week, next month, more and more Jews keep showing up at this Christian Science reading room in Manhattan, and so they start bringing their own food, and it's like, and then they're outnumbering the personnel. Right? The personnel are still delivering lectures. Oh, it's a primary joy to see you all here today, and I hope. But then they start to see these people aren't really interested in Christian science. They're not going to convert. They're just like overwhelming us. So this is totally the Wellenbeck situation in submission. This is totally the Wellenbeck situation. But the interesting thing is, and then they say, this is all very nice, but um, please don't come here ever again. So then they kicked him out. It's totally the Wellenbeck is pictured to take over the Col Normal superior by the Muslims. And the guy, I repeat this sometimes on occasion, this sort of Samuel T. Francis type guy, paleoconservative, and he keeps saying, and he's deep involved in this narrative about Islam and this war of sort of cosmic civilizational war. And then he said, in Brussels, it's 80%. The city of Brussels is 80% Muslim now. 80% Muslim. It used to be Catholic. Now it's 80% Muslim. So it's like this. I think it's really like 25% or something, which is high. But it's. But he kept insisting on this, and it's sort of like Samuel Jackson sort of hectoring, And then there was this Indian guy who was in there, and he says, I was just in Brussels. It's like I was walking, and then, and so then this guy says, well, yeah, but they knew you were there, and they were only showed you to certain places, and when when you were going by, these ushered the Muslims away because they want to make that impression for the tourists, of course. They only let you go in certain places, and so there's this idea of the getting sort of flooded, right? So this is obviously what happened in South Africa. They knew it was going to happen, and it happened. I think the situation in South Africa, it's kind of like there's hundreds of years when basically the tribal people did what they were doing without that much interference from the Afrikaners, and then there was a time when people kept saying, well, you have to be democratically involved, and then they kept going into the tribes and agitating and saying, well, you have to participate in the in the process. You have to be a participant, and you ought to be casting a vote, and that's what led to this whole apartheid misery. And then, because it's like this notion of you have to awaken your consciousness. You're here, you're happy, you're living your tribal existence. You don't really care about the outside as long as they don't mess with you. But it's wrong. It's wrong. You need to have this more Boulēsis. So they really did inject Boulēsis into a lot of people. The sense of like a notion of this is what's your rational dignity depends on voting, and it depends on being part of the modern world. I think. Yeah, that linked to Kristen Stewart's directing when she had a team which was basically totally a part of a solidarity type of situation. And then some people wouldn't sort of go along with the show. So it's just like she ruthlessly cuts them out. That's exactly how fascism works. You don't have to have like, oh, we already made an agreement with this person to have that they're going to be in the film. We need to have a process. There's some kind of rule there's all these rules and so on. No, she ruthlessly takes over as the director or the despot, and just as the movements of her own body should cast out the parts of the crew and the cast and the crew that don't fit her designs, because her designs are meant to be those designs which are best for the overall project and everyone involved. That's a fascist way of operating. That's exactly fascism. But it would have different characters, depending on whether it's California fascism. I mean, I would point everyone again to Isaiah Berlin's account of liberal authoritarianism, but I think this is sort of in the direction of what he's saying. And I think it's the simplest example. I don't know, some people don't like it, but I think it's the most obvious and simple example, and just overlay it with that example of the actual history of the Christian Science reading room, which is so clear from an anecdotal point of view. X and Blue Sky. It's just that people just don't like to be in a situation where they don't know what the rules are and they could get in trouble, and there's people that are sort of part of a group that they don't really approve of and don't really like and don't feel comfortable around, and they switch electronically to a different, but it's not that it's electronic, it's more like, I think it's just more like who's running it, who's sort of setting the ethos, who's setting the Boulēsis. I think it's the Boulēsis factor. So if Jang is more aware of this sort of thing, if Jang is actually a representative of the PRC, they can use algorithmic methods to get their population to do something that's good, to be more aware of this Boulēsis problem, that it makes us more human, and they already have total contempt for this Western world as subhuman, because we're abandoned. It's not that we abandoned just Hegel and the historicism, but also abandoned Aristotle. So this whole sense that some people can grasp this situation of what it is when we're sort of what formation really is. So it's like, what does formation degenerate it to? If you're academic, it's sort of like there's some departments, and then they read certain shit, and then it's like, oh, do you I don't know, did you read Lyotard, and did you read Appetitive, Ronell, and did you read the big, I mean, it used to be the most prestigious, like Walter Benjamin, the Arcades Project. There was a time when these things were sort of sacred somehow, along with depending on your field, right? There's going to be different things. If you're a lawyer or something, then you're going to have a bunch of cases that like offhand, whether it's Lochner or whether it's there's like a half dozen Supreme Court cases that are constantly mentioned again and again and again, Brown versus Board of Education and so on. And then one doesn't even know the great majority of the cases that come out of the Supreme Court. I mean, one will keep up with who the Supreme Court justices are, but one will not know sort of like every decision very closely that's come out, or remember them afterwards, because they're not going to come up again. Nobody's talking about them. Formation ends up by being sort of there's a number of how should one say that there's allusions constantly being made to a number of authors, a number of technical terms, a number of but for legal causation analysis. There's all kinds of things that one will be drawn into and then take seriously. But what about formation itself? So then you get this situation where the professors are created according to a certain formation, but they haven't. They're sort of like it's basically like this department thinks, or this field as represented by a number of departments think somebody that these are the things that are worthwhile, but if we try to talk about the whole university, there's always some kind of how did they call it? There's a French phrase for this, professional distortion, or however it's called. And then, you never get to this, the more powerful questions, which I think the Chinese in a way have more available to themselves. Of course, Dugan does, but Dugan isn't. Dugan needs like decades to more students, to have his curriculum come into the universities or spread more widely. That can't happen overnight. So, but whereas Zhang is already in a situation where this is sort of happening. Hegel, again, with his absolute, he goes away from this Aristotelian position where these things are sort of on either side. And he never reaches either this Aristotle position of Heidegger. Instead, what he does is sort of just, if you notice at the beginning of the Logic, he makes some comment like, I don't really know what to do now with nous, and he sort of drops the subject. Or I guess we're supposed to think it falls into this so-called indeterminate immediacy of the what he says at the beginning of the Logic about the nothing and the becoming and being, this understanding of them. So we get another path, which is sort of interesting, is that because there's another Hegelianism, and so that's sort of the path that these two forces cancel out and then are retired to Aristotle and Hegel. And sort of, I guess, analytic philosophy is more Aristotle, and continental philosophy or European philosophy is more Hegel, because there's something like the Christchurch Oxford is basically Aristotle. Whatever the A.J. Ayer has done, whatever the modern developments can happen to analytic philosophy are, it's basically as this Aristotelian. There's philosophy, and then there's daily life, and there are two different things. Attitude. You get the other tradition partially from Croce, right? So Croce, as sort of going directly to Hegel, I don't think necessarily through a chain in any way, through another, in the way that it was with Husserl and then Heidegger. But then Croce creating his student Giovanni Gentili, who produces the fascism. So then we could see this fascism, but fascism is really to be is a part of the sort of Hegelian spirit in a way, but if it's juxtaposed to the so-called golden straitjacket, to the globalist surrendering of the sovereignty, in order to get the market fundamentalist advantages. The fascism is the opposite of that. It's the actual sovereignty. So fascism is it appears just as the actual sovereignty in contradistinction to sort of the swamp, as it's, they call Washington the swamp, and the swamp things, or to see Ted Cruz is probably a swamp thing. So then one could so then the question is like, this is the thing, or do you have these problems with Levinas or these other people that are supposed to be holy, Paul Celan or whatever. And they say things like, there's no poetry after Auschwitz or something like that. Here there is no Varun, kind of this pathos of Auschwitz, which is the place where there's no why. That's the context in which you say after Auschwitz there's no poetry is said. This sort of Stellung, or sort of self-situation, waiting of one's vocation, as it were, as a being. So that my vocation as a being is to rather prefer remembrance. So you'll get these different attitudes which are sort of close to the Boulēsis in a way, but they don't thematize it. It's directly Aristotelian, with directly Aristotelian instrumentum. Then one wants to say, take it that way, but also the other way we could see, like this guy that wrote a book about Christian. I think his name is something like Christian Latner. He wrote a book saying, from like a neo-Nazi point of view, if you want to gloss it that way, saying, there's this Hindu or Aryan precursors to the Gospels, and the Christ is just a copy of this version, and he makes all these scholarly proofs. But this same guy was a guy that was quote-unquote Holocaust denier, but his big point, but he eventually changed. He was, there's the guy Butts and the guy, the French guy, Ferguson or whatever, and then he makes this point, but he came around. He changed his views. Maybe it was kind of like Jeffrey Sachs or something, but he makes this point that what a lot of people object to is that the Holocaust is like a theme, is an interpretation. It's like a propaganda interpretation. It's one thing to say 20 million people died and they were murdered. 20 million people were systematically murdered. It's one thing to say it's a genocide, but then when you add this poetry to it, this Levinas to it, and so on, this Eli Wallach's Night to it. This is the Holocaust. Is the Holocaust? It would be fine. You could just have. If people say the Shoah, it's a private word, okay. But when you say Holocaust, then it's belligerent. It's belligerent, and it's sort of like at the same time it reminds of what both Arendt and Leo Strauss said, which is that this notion of anti-Semitism should be struck from the language, because people spontaneously dislike some people. They might dislike a whole culture, and moreover, some cultures are maybe more gifted than others. We don't have to necessarily be totally crazy about it. Sometimes we might admit some cultures are more gifted than others in some way, and it's also very polite. We don't say some races necessarily, but some cultures, or some civilizations, as Dugan puts it. There could be ways. There's some people don't like this situation from the other side about I'm just thematizing the whole atmosphere in which we now sort of discuss the notion of World War II and the Holocaust, and death camps, and Hitler understood as a murderer and so on. Because what I want to say is, what if there is fascism, without murder? What if there's there would be a star chamber. It'd probably be in Skiff or something, and it would operate with, and it might operate with the Stargate technology. But is that actually? The question is there's, there's a lot of questions here. There's one, what makes us better human beings in this what raises us up and makes us more Kalan, So one thing, we want the situation to be beautiful in a certain sense. Like Strauss said, Beyond Good and Evil is Nietzsche's most beautiful book. It might not be his most profound book. It might not be his best book. Heidegger is focused on the will to power, of course, which is even incomplete text, but regarded as the culmination of Nietzsche. But the most beautiful, Strauss says, is the Beyond Good and Evil. But we want this picture in some way to be beautiful, because then, to a certain extent, that plays a role in that Boulēsis situation, and that sort of, when are we about to just like bolt and move from this spot? Are we guided by certain motivations? But then you think it would be more beautiful to follow this path. It's noble. It's something's desirable about it in itself. So I think that's a point of juxtaposition that's worth contemplating, and it doesn't in itself exhaust sort of the directions, but it suggests, I think, with the other examples, the directions. Let me just add one. I'll just add one more thing. It's like, who is it exactly that's like has this Kristen Stewart taste? That's the like there's this points made by, according to Billy Corrigan, Courtney Love was more famous somehow because she came from like more of a middle class background, and then she was perceived as somehow a class traitor by going down towards the grunge direction. And this was sort of considered romantic, whereas I think he considered himself more from a lower class. And so he didn't have the same situation. But who is it that has this sense of the hierarchy of types of films? So it's like, obviously Tarkovsky, somebody like that, right? And then we could say like there's this sort of Arjan, or what did they say this? Keep the Change, Garde la Monnaie film from Robert Bresson. And then you said that, this is supposed to be the high cinema. This is supposed to be the film art. This is supposed to be what we're making. And then you could see that in Kristen Stewart's taste is like that. It's like, and then there's some other people, like there's some Scottish director that made a movie called Morgan Callner or something like that, which looks very much like the aesthetically, it looks a lot like the movie she made, the Chronology of Water. But there's this notion of here's the canon of film. But who is it that's actually inculcated into that sense of a hierarchy, and what does it actually mean? So let me give it in another presentation, is that there's a certain taste in architecture and in art, certainly. It involves acquired taste, and I mean, I don't know, I feel like I like brutalism just spontaneously, but maybe it's also because I have in my background a lot of like having looked at pictures and books that have presented that things in that direction, in what appears to be like on a pedestal or something, in a as though it were something admirable, something to be take a primary joy in. This problem of taste, and then the point is, like, there could be architects. There's probably a lot of architects that they like certain architecture. There's Louis Kahn or whatever, and then they like certain architecture which not necessarily everyone really likes, and then to some extent you could sort of flip people and get them to like it in the same way. I mean, recently I noticed this thing. There's this, and then I wondered, like, to what extent of people are actually aware of these sort of fluctuations. Like, it seemed to me there was a moment when there was a huge amount of media dispatches. It was just a small spate for a few days or something, but people kept saying, "Oh, it turns out that." I mean, I guess some finding came out. It turns out that AI is making us dumber because we're just memorizing these answers the AI tells us, and it gives us the answers we want, and it dumbs us down. And we're losing our ability, our thinking muscle, something like that. I think it took me a long time before I sort of sunk in that I'm like, I don't have that experience at all. That's not what's happening to me. When I use Grok, I find it very helpful, and of course I know but I think maybe partially because I'm aware when it's giving me the Forschungslage answers, the state of the research answers, sort of the canonical, here's what the people in these departments think makes sense answers. I'm aware when Grok's giving me those. So I'm kind of like, okay, he's giving me this. I didn't know this particular fact, but I can see that this is the standard answer. And then, so you're still thinking, you're still awake. So really, I think it's a question of whether people are just taking it in order to sort of pseudo-fake something, because anybody that sort of has a sense of this sees through it rather rapidly, but I guess maybe some people don't. I mean, I knew a sociopath that made this, like, he went around saying he went to Columbia University. He had gone to SF State. And it seemed to me every academic saw through him immediately. He didn't go to Columbia. It was obvious, because the guy's sort of, a fathead or something. Like, it's sort of very stupid. Or dense, I guess is the word, dense. It was sort of obvious he was too dense. But some people believed him. And I guess the people that believed him were more the people that weren't, whatever the opposite of dense is, more sprightly, mentally could see that. So there's also these factors of hiving off into different tastes, which then in a certain way correspond to the Boulēsis. So, like, I mean, if you think of, like, Japan at a certain age, you notice that there was totally different standards in that book. I think of that book about the Genji, the Tales of Genji. There's some book written about that age, the Fujiwaras, is it? There's so many things that you see there that are obviously, due to somebody thinks it's beautiful. There's Kalan behind it. They're doing things this way. And not just calligraphy, but I mean ways of operating government, and the notion of splitting off the government between the emperor and Fujiwaras, and other things that simply seems somehow attractive ways of handling the problems of life. I think that's a unique notion of form. Just this, like, lifting of the metaphor or sort of metonymy. If you think of architects and their specific tastes and what they like, and then you think of the general public, and then in the same way, there's how many cultural and political movements have this same institutional structures where you could then look and say, yeah, there's factors that aren't like total. They're part of these hived off structures, and then isn't it that this canon, the film canon of art films that we're just describing in connection to Kristen Stewart, isn't this also one of these hived off special things? And then of course so the chronology of water, so probably she would hope that just as Clouds of Sils Maria, which apparently was originally just called Sils Maria, which Nietzsche had visited, by the way, and I guess Wagner probably. I don't know. That sounds it seems like the right area, but yeah. How much do we see in the attempts to cater to the taste of these film archives and the crowds that go around those film archives? Yeah, a certain bondage to form in a way, and then of course one could always say like, yeah, I spontaneously like brutalism. Sure, I do, but on the other hand, what if it's not just? What if I'm the architect and then I'm making these things, and then I'm sort of like, yeah, then you have these questions like how much is there dialing it in just for because they want to sustain their current level of how do they call it, their current style of life. They want to be maintained in their current style of life, and they're just dialing it in. That can be a path too, right? But it's not. But that's the problem. It's not just a generic thing. Like usually one says these things just sort of generically, but it has to be. There's a particular canon of very particular canon of films that are regarded as the most exemplary in these art situations, and then there's beside from them there's actual art films. So as it were, like the V girls and this kind of thing. Yeah, like actual art films, which aren't even feature films, and it all comes in this very particularized context, which is possibly, yeah, materially, directly part of this golden straitjacket, which, yeah, all the guilt and the Second Empire style of Trump seems to fittingly sort of echo